There is a rise in professional tenants in Los Angeles. These tenants rent homes with the intention of not paying rent, and they've figured out a way to not get evicted or delay the process for a year or so. And our laws allow that. Our guest today is Avi Sinai, who's a real estate attorney who's seeing what's happening on the ground in the courtrooms today and how certain tenants are able to use the laws to avoid paying rent.
I call them professional tenants. These are tenants that are moving from one place to another, intentionally not paying the rent. They know how to game the system. I've seen cases in which a tenant was evicted 6 times in 14 years. And that's happening in residential, it's happening in commercial.
We contacted our attorney. He said straight out, you have a problem here. You have a illegal marijuana dispensary that has taken place on your property. He said, hey, do you want your property back or do you want your money back? And we said, well, we want our property back more than anything else. He says, well, great, because most likely you're not gonna get your money back.
I'm Siamai Korami. Welcome to California Insider. Avi, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're a real estate attorney. You're actually watching what's going on in LA, and we are hearing problems with the squatting and evictions and other kinds of problems in real estate that has kind of shifted the way tenants and landlords work together. And it made it more difficult for both sides. Can you tell us what's happening, what you see out there in LA?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been now focusing about 90% of my time, 80% of my time in eviction litigation, taking evictions to trial in LA County. And it's just a completely different world than 5 years ago. It's COVID and the new rules changed everything. And it's not just one rule that brought us where we are today, where it takes months to evict a tenant who's not paying rent or have a lease violation or for any other illegal reason. It's many rules, many small changes that got us to where we are today.
Can you give us some examples of these changes?
Sure. You wind back the clock 5 years. If you have a judgment and you're waiting for the sheriff to come lock out the tenant, that's a process that should take maybe 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. Because of budget cuts and because the county's under financial constraints and maybe some other choices, maybe allocation of manpower and shortage with deputies, now it takes 2 to 3 months in LA County. So imagine going through an eviction case, spending a fortune on a lawyer, not collecting rent during the eviction because you can't collect rent during the eviction, you're going to lose your case, winning in trial, and then after that, you have to wait 3 months for the sheriff to come and lock out the tenant. So that means that even if you win a case on a default and everything goes by very, very quickly, you're talking about a minimum of 4.5 months from notice till you get your property back. It's just too long.
And you don't get paid for that rent, right?
Of course not, right? And just so people understand, if a tenant can't pay rent, it's probably for good reason. Either they choose not to or they can't afford that. Even if you have a judgment against that tenant for that money, it's uncollectible. So essentially, the landlords are left with this debt, with this unpaid rent, and a big hole in their pocket, which is probably gets transferred to other tenants or future tenants.
And what's the impact of all of this for people that may not know and may not care about evictions?
Yeah, I think there is an immediate impact in a sense that enforcing property rights and legal costs have risen dramatically, right? The word is out there with tenants, right? Tenants know that if they don't pay the rent or there's an eviction, they're going to be provided a lawyer by the county for free. There's all these nonprofits that will represent them. They know that there's going to be virtually no consequences of not paying the rent. So the impact to the bottom line, that's immediate. I think that the other second order effects here are, if you're an investor today or a developer, you don't know what new laws are going to be passed to protect tenants. This process can get worse. Every 6 months, we have new regulations, whether it's from the state or the city. And these regulations are either making the process longer or they're adding another layer of protections and another way for the tenants to dismiss the case easily in court, which again makes the process longer. So this unknown from potential regulation is what is keeping a lot of investors from coming back to California or making investors sell their assets and moving on to other states or not developing here at all.
As someone reporting on California's economy and policies every week, unfortunately, I see the middle class shrinking in California. Some of it has to do with our policies, and there is another side to this that we are facing major inflation here and across the country. Unfortunately, the dollar has lost 10% of its value just this year to date. That's why more and more people are turning to real assets to protect their financial future, like physical gold and silver from American Hardful Gold. Unlike paper assets, these tangible investments can't be controlled or devalued by inflation or bad policies. You can have them delivered straight to your home or securely stored in a tax-advantaged gold IRA, giving you a safe, reliable way to safeguard your wealth, no matter what happens in California or the rest of the country. American Hardful Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of 5-star reviews. And right now, when you call, you can get up to $15,000 in free silver with your first purchase. Call 866-595-2304. That's 866-595-2304. Or text Cali to 65532. Make sure to text Cali to 65532. Do they charge more for rent because of this? If some people haven't paid them 6 months, do they try to raise the prices?
Of course. I mean, it's natural. If you have to allocate 3 or 4 or 5 times your legal costs, and you have to project that in the next 5 years, you're going to raise your rents. And I think that the other back-end problem here is that if you know that it's if you are going to accept a tenant, and there is a risk that you're not going to be able to collect rent for 6 to 9 months, you're probably going to vet tenants a lot harder. You are much less willing to take risks on someone with maybe a 580 credit score. Maybe they have something on the record. And because it's hard to enforce property rights, because it's hard to get possession back, you're not going to take a risk with a tenant like that. So it makes it harder for tenants to get housing, and it raises housing costs on renters.
In terms of what you have seen in the market, are a lot of people taking advantage of these laws? Because these laws are really designed for the people that don't have the money and they're going through a rough time and they want to help them. Like the state wants to help them, the city wants to help them. But are there a lot of people that are not in that category that are using these laws to?
100%. And I call them professional tenants. And if you go to court, right, you always see the same people, the same lawyers, same judges, same defense lawyers, and a lot of times the same tenants. These are tenants that are moving from one place to another, intentionally not paying the rent. They know how to game the system. They know how to stretch a case. And there's a lot of people taking advantage of the problem, right? So they're jumping from house to house to house, apartment to apartment to apartment, and getting evicted from each one. I've seen cases in which a tenant was evicted 6 times in 14 years.
Wow. 6 times.
Yeah. And that's happening in residential. It's happening in commercial, right? There is now a plague of illegal marijuana shops in LA County who are well aware of how to game the system. They use the same tactic to gain possession of a retail store. They come under false pretense. They immediately don't pay the rent. The landlord has no idea they're leasing out a store to a drug shop. They're thinking they're leasing the store to like a clothing shop or a smoke shop. And then a week later they come and they see an illegal drugstore. And then you have to evict them. And it takes 6 to 7 months, another 2 to 3 months for the sheriff. The landlord can't collect rent, and they just go to the next store and the next store and the next store.
It was shocking for us to hear this story that commercial tenants are using these laws as well not to get evicted. We go to Thomas, whose family has experienced this firsthand. We want to hear from you about commercial squatting. You guys are having your own story about this. Can you tell us what happened to you guys?
Yeah, so my parents had a property in Altadena. This is like a commercial warehouse property. My father passed away about 5 years ago, and it was decided, hey, let's take this property and let's put it on the market and rent it out. So my mom, she spent around It's $120,000. We revent, make it beautiful for office space. And we decided to put on the market in 24 for rental. We got with a commercial broker, well known in the area, very preferred. And we met some tenants over time. And then we came across one tenant that looked promising. This tenant that we got with, obviously it was not promised at the end, but it appeared to be. So this was a person that was represented. They had a broker, went the proper channels. We had due diligence. And we're very sophisticated. I'm always very sophisticated with property management as well. Even met the potential tenant in person. And in 24 in August, we decided to go ahead and sign a lease with them. They're going to be their online clothing store at 2 locations, and they want to open another store in the Los Angeles County area. We thought, hey, great fit, great financials. Soon thereafter, we contacted them about 3 weeks after. They said, hey, we need our furniture back for the staging. We haven't heard from them for 3 weeks. And Mom said, I'm going to go down there. Maybe they're just busy. A little rude, but let's go down there and check out what's going on. She walked in. The business looked the same from outside in the beginning. She walked in and she noticed right away there's new walls put up. The coloring of the walls were painted to these swirls and all this stuff going on. And the smell of marijuana was very dominant. There's a fake wall they put up, and in the fake wall, she went up there in the tinted glass and she says, who are you? And the person responded with every time she asked a question, he responded the same way. Who are you? You don't belong here. You don't belong here. And just went down that path until my mom was quite frightened by the whole situation. And she just walked right out. Yeah. So that was when we realized we have a problem here. We don't have the tenants that we thought we did.
And how did that happen? So they had a fake name and fake entity, or?
They came across against an online clothing store. Through any kind of normal commercial transaction, you always, of course, do due diligence. We look at bank statements, their profit and loss for the last 2 years, credit cards, everything. And they provided all that information. It even had a website. They even had a website that matched exactly what they're describing. Within a month, that website was gone. But we basically got fraudulent documents, and later learning on that those documents were stolen identity from individuals, forged documents, forged bank statements, and even going through a actual commercial broker through their due diligence. And again, I question how well that was done. We go on the trust of the people we hire, and we looked at it, and we're not forensic analysts, so. But now looking back, you could see a little bit of issues with the font and everything. But they came in with actual documents and even visiting the place, very professional. 2 people coming in, talking about what they want to do and their plans. It was very, very believable.
And what happened next? So 3 weeks into it, you guys found out that something is going wrong there. They were selling marijuana there?
Yeah, so we realized, okay, we have a problem here. So within the next few weeks, we contacted our attorney, who referred us to a attorney who specializes in these kind of real estate issues. He said straight out, you have a problem here. You have a legal marijuana dispensary that has taken place on your property. It's all the signs of that. Actually, he asked us this question. He said, hey, do you want your property back or do you want your money back? And we said, well, we want our property back more than anything else. And he says, well, great, because most likely you're not going to get your money back. So you're going to go between 6 to 9 months to get your property back. But he advised us saying, do not contact them. Do not turn off your utilities. Do not do anything. You can contact the police, but you got to go through the court process. This is what they're going to tell you. He's absolutely right. I've contacted the state of California Cannabis team. There's another organization with LA County. I contacted them. I even went to the narcotics team directly within the area. And the same thing, you have to go through the eviction process.
So the fact that they were selling illegal marijuana, did they get raided by the police?
They did get raided from the sheriffs at least 2 to 3 times, which is unfortunate because sometimes, as our attorney is telling us, you can get them out really quick, especially if it's a city, because they'll rate them. And what happens every time, when they got rated, they came back in business the very next day. But if you were able to rate them again and again and again, eventually they say, hey, the cost is not outweighing the benefit of staying here, we need to go. But because of it took about a year for this whole process, only 3 maybe real raids from the sheriff's department wasn't enough.
So they wouldn't get arrested or they would get released? How would they come back?
It's a great show, video footage of all of it on our cameras. But they go in, they break down the doors, they seize money, they seize the marijuana, they document everything's going in there, and anyone who's at the property, they receive a citation. It says court appearance on it. I never seen anything with us being involved with any court with them, but a citation. And so no, there was catch and release at that very moment. They will lock up for that day. And the next day they'll be back in business and customers were at the front door.
And because you guys have this kind of lease situation with them, they are allowed to come back and legally operate until you evict them. Is that what's happening?
Correct. So that's, even though it's a fraudulent lease of, they didn't have it's not a real company. They had every right to be there. They were protected. We couldn't turn off utilities. And the thing is too, don't even contact them, because it advise that way, because it will mess up the court proceedings of how we can get them out. We don't want to create any delay tactics that they would be looking for, which they were very good at doing that.
So how are they doing in court? Do they have lawyers and they're fighting back, or?
Yes. So this operation, I call them an operation because they had attorneys. They showed up every time, very well prepared, and they knew the loopholes. They knew what to say. They knew how to examine every document to find any kind of issue with a server processing, anything that can delay the proceedings. They would actually even have already submitted I don't know the exact legal term, but to reject or dismiss a proposal from us before we even propose it. They were thinking already 2 steps ahead of us what we will do just to cause a delay. And they were outstanding on doing that. And I hate to say how great they were, but they were very good at doing that. In fact, our attorney, he said this is the first time he's seen this be so bad. Speaking to his colleagues of other firms, that they have faced these people, and they said you're gonna be on a tough road with them. They'll fight to the end with it.
And how long has it been? And how you guys haven't got any rent, right, from this?
Correct. No rent the whole time. Even if they were going to give it to us, we wouldn't accept it. But no rent. Everything took an entire year. It was almost a year and 1 week.
How much did it cost you to go through this process?
For attorney fees, we're looking around $45,000
Wow.
for attorney fees. Lost rent, where I have that numbers in front of me, I believe it's around $67,000 in lost rent. To fix the damages, we just got our final bill is $43,000 to fix the damages to the property.
$43,000.
$43,000. Remove all the fake walls, all the damage to the flooring, and they reinforced of course the raids broke all our doors, which is fine, but they would cage everything in. Everything was welded, skylights, windows, doors. They structurally damaged the building, which resulted in $43,000 worth of repairs after that.
They walked away. And now they're probably going somewhere else. Is that how it worked?
Pretty much how it works. So judgment was, of course, you must leave and, you get the property back, and also to refund all lost rent. Now, our attorney told us, look, you do not want to, I don't advise you to try to go after them for the money. First, you're not going to get the money back. They'll just, good luck with that. Number two, these are really bad actors. And my advice is you just leave it alone, because, you don't want to see retaliation or anything else go on. And so he advised us leave it alone, and we agreed too. We just have to take it, and they move on. This is interesting too. About few weeks before they're about to get closed out, they were already handing out flyers. They found a new location not too far away, and they were already getting their customers sent to in a new location. Very business savvy, I'll tell you.
Here's the problem. The eviction laws in California, just like many other states, were designed in a very, very specific way. Unlike a regular civil case that can take 3 or 4 years to litigate in court, an eviction is supposed to be very quick. 3 days to pay or quit, 5 days to respond to a lawsuit, a trial in 20 days, another 2 weeks for the sheriff. The exchange is that the rules are very strict. What happened is over the years, there are more restrictions, and property owners have lost the ability to enforce their property rights quickly, as designed by the law.
So then it allows people to go from one place to another place.
Exactly, right? And theoretically, they can just pack up and leave a day before trial, and then you don't have an eviction trial. And now there are rules that will not even appear on the record, because the record is permanently sealed.
So the future landlords cannot see.
Exactly, right? Eviction records are sealed automatically, unless you can get a judgment very, very quickly, which is almost impossible. So this will not show up on background checks. It will not even show up if you try to search the case in the court's record.
How does it work that these people can come to court, and doesn't it cost, there's legal fees, right, for them? Is there legal fees for them to fight with the landlords?
Yeah, so the state allows self-litigants, even if they're represented by a lawyer, to waive court costs if they're financially impacted. The city of Los Angeles and LA County has a program called Stay Housed LA, which is the umbrella program that diverts taxpayer funds to nonprofits. These nonprofits represent tenants for free if they qualify in court for eviction protections, among other things.
How do they qualify? So is it the people that are not able to pay, or?
Yeah, so I believe the latest qualifications is you got to be in the bottom 80% of earners in LA, of the AMI, and you have to live in certain zip codes in order to qualify. But even if you don't qualify for a lawyer, you can still get a lot of self-help. So a nonprofit organization will provide you with a trial binder, right? They'll give you advice on the side. Maybe an attorney's not going to represent you in court, but they'll be able to file the paperwork for you, and they'll tell you what to do, and they'll give you trial documents so you can represent yourself in court.
So in a sense, you're equipped with what you need to delay the process for 6, 7, 8 months.
Exactly, right? So again, obviously always better to have a lawyer representing you, but the next best option is to buy time and do just enough to delay and get to a jury trial, which is another big problem, right? Tenants have a right to a jury trial. It's hard to find juries. It's hard to find trial courtrooms because they're in short supply. That adds significant amount of time to the whole process.
And who are the people that call you, the landlords, your customers?
It's mostly mom and pop landlords, right? People who have property for rent, small apartment buildings, and some larger institutions as well that are housing providers in LA County.
Is there other side of this where the landlords are just kicking people out for not good reasons?
Yeah, I hear that all the time. I think that kind of prevailing sentiment is the basis of a lot of these laws being passed. And look, I'm sure there are some property owners out there who are seeing a tenant who's low paying because of rent control, and they're going to do whatever it takes to remove that tenant, even if it takes illegal means or evictions in bad faith. And I'm sure it happens. But the amount that I'm seeing is so small. And there are already laws that allow tenants to bring actions against landlords who do that, wrongful evictions. And they've existed for many, many years. The amount of defenses that are completely baseless, they far outweigh whatever small amount of unlawful evictions taking place. So a lot of times we see a tenant that owes tens of thousands of dollars in rent, didn't pay the rent for 2 years. And the line of defense is, well, I did not get a notice on time. Or when I moved in, I wasn't informed of my rights. Or I'm being discriminated against. So the case will get dismissed because maybe the notice didn't have the number of bedrooms on it.
Meanwhile, the person has been living there.
Exactly. So now the property owner has to refile the case, restart the process all over again. By the way, there's another side to this, right? That all these laws make the life of tenants hard too. If a tenant didn't pay rent for 6 to 7 months because they're in eviction, now the landlord has to refile the case. Now the tenant accrued a much higher debt, right, for an apartment they probably cannot afford anymore. And who wins here, right? Now maybe the landlord sends this amount of debt to collections and that impacts their credit. No one's a winner here with the current system.
How do you think these laws come about? How do you think this happens?
So I think that, and this is my opinion, right? I think that there are some basic prevailing sentiments that are being pushed by various interest groups to city council and to the legislators in Sacramento that all landlords are evil, that we have a housing shortage, that evictions cause homelessness. All of these are not true. To say that evictions cause homelessness, it is true that we have a lot of homeless in California, right? But to say that eviction causes homelessness is like saying layoffs cause unemployment. So we have to stop layoffs. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Evictions happen because the tenant is not paying rent, because they're violating the lease, they sublease the place illegally, there's some illegal activity. It's not because landlords have this inherent desire to evict tenants for no good reason, especially when the process is so expensive, takes so long. I think that a lot of these sentiments are supported by academic studies. For example, right, Stanford just issued a study this year in collaboration with Los Angeles County Superior Court. And in that study, they had a figure that 80 to 90% of evictions are uncontested. I asked the authors of the study, how many eviction lawyers have you consulted with when you wrote the study? They said none. You ask any eviction lawyer in LA County, what is the amount of evictions that goes uncontested? It's less than 25% at the moment. There's no way that figure is true. And I have no idea how they got to 80, 90%. But these studies are unvetted. They're presented to city council with almost no opposition. And laws are passed based on these studies.
Did they tell you how they got that number?
I think they had a live webinar, so there was an opportunity to ask questions. It's unclear to me how they got to that number. Because there's no way, if you practice evictions on the tenant side or on the landlord side, you know that this 80, 90% number is untrue.
Because tenants have access to lawyers for free, is that?
Yeah, exactly, right? So Measure ULA has increased the funding for homeless preventions substantially. So now almost every tenant in LA County is entitled to a free lawyer. That's actually now required by law to notify the tenants. It's called right to counsel, right? So every landlord has to notify a tenant.
So they have to tell the tenant that you have access to a lawyer if now that we're going to evict you.
So you have to notify the tenant when you sign the lease agreement. You have to post that notice of rights on the building. And you have to give that notice when you give the tenant an eviction notice.
So you tell them that they have access to free legal help.
Yeah, so tenants have access to free legal help. There are self-help centers at every courthouse, I believe. And even if one of these free nonprofit law firms can represent you, they'll give you trial binders. They'll give you materials for you to defend yourself in court.
For some of us that may not know the picture you're seeing, you're talking to a lot of cases. Can you paint a picture of what you see there?
Yeah, I think that, a typical case, right, you're going to see a tenant who has not paid rent in a few months. Landlord tries to work out things with the tenant because it's expensive to hire a lawyer. Nobody wants to go through this process. It's painful for everyone. Once they can't work it out, they come to someone like me. And then once you start the eviction, you can't collect rent. You have to go through the process. The tenant is going to be represented by most likely a nonprofit. Because truth be told, it's very hard to get representation for tenants. There are not a lot of private attorneys who do that. And if you can't pay rent, you can't pay a lawyer, right? So that's a big problem, right, for tenants. It's not easy. And while the times to respond are longer, they're still not that long. So you have to find an attorney quickly, right, which is difficult. So they're going to get representation from a nonprofit, and essentially then it's a game of cat and mouse, right? You go to court, there's delays, it's hard to find a jury, there's some discovery, and most cases settle, right? Because nobody wants to go to trial. It's expensive to go to trial. The tenant don't want a judgment against them, landlord doesn't want to spend the money, which makes perfect sense. So most of these cases settle, right? So how does that look like? The tenant gets some time to leave, maybe the landlord waives some rent, maybe the tenant pays something, and then everyone goes their merry ways, right? Sometimes even the landlord has to give a reference letter to the new landlord.
Wow.
Right? They request that so they are able to find housing. And that really goes to the incentive structure, right? The landlord wants his property back. They're probably less interested in just the money, right? They just want their property back. But what happens in the next one? Because they don't see a record, because all the records are sealed. They don't know anything, right? All they get is a reference letter from the previous landlord, and it's on to the next.
Wow.
What do you say to the tenant when they just went 6-7 months without paying rent? There were no consequences. They didn't have to pay a lawyer. All the court fees were waived. Times get tough, they can just do it again.
You mentioned the concept of professional tenants.
Mm-hmm.
Is that on the rise? Are there more and more people joining this?
Oh, yeah. And I've been hired multiple times to evict the same people by different people.
Wow.
And these housing providers reach out to me organically, right?
Without knowing each other.
Without knowing me that I already evicted that tenant before. Right? And I'm a small office. I don't run like a super high volume firm or anything. So that is on the rise. I think another big issue that's impact housing is habitability lawsuits from personal injury lawyers. When a house is not habitable, like there's no hot water, you can't lock the doors, you can't heat the place, right? The landlord is required to fix it. The legislator passed a few laws, many laws, that give tenants an affirmative right to sue the landlord when the unit is not habitable. A few other conditions exist. In the past, these claims were rather small. In the past few years, personal injury lawyers and tenant lawyers have entered this field in greater numbers, and now insurance companies are paying tens of thousands of dollars per plaintiff to settle these cases. The problem is, it's twofold, is these laws have automatic statutory fees attached to them. So any violation could get the tenant a penalty of $5,000 to $10,000. They can ask for rent back, and they can ask for attorney's fees as well, right? So I don't know if you heard about ADA lawsuits,
yes.
Disability lawsuits.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing, right? You get a notice from a lawyer. Sure enough, you get a lawsuit. The problem is that now insurance companies, they don't want to provide coverage for it anymore. So in the last year and a half, landlords are getting denial letters of coverage from insurance companies because insurance costs are rising and it's a big problem. So now the landlord has to pay an attorney out of pocket, pay the settlement out of pocket, and one case like that can eat up their profit for the entire year, right? And they have to sell the building.
Do you see more and more people selling buildings and getting out of this business?
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've seen clients and just cases that I've seen with one bad eviction causes them just to sell the building, right? Or one bad habitability lawsuit and say, you know what, I don't want to deal with it. And the problem is usually the people who buy those buildings are companies with already a lot of units. So there's been consolidation in LA County. And I see that all the time.
What's the impact of that?
Well, if you own large-scale units, over 1,000 units, 2,000 units, now you have power. You're not going to be intimidated by a letter from the city attorney's office. These larger companies have much higher collection rates. They have in-house attorneys. They actually go after unpaid rent. They have stricter requirements. LA County is known to have, and it still does, right? There's still a very small amount of housing units owned by large corporate landlords. Most of the landlords in LA County are mom and pop, but that's disappearing, right? And you can work with a mom and pop landlord, right? If you can't pay the rent, it's someone that you know on a first name basis. If it's a large company, you're dealing with a machine. You don't have that option. They might not give you the same grace that someone who knew you for 5-7 years.
And when they sell these buildings, does the rent control go away?
No, rent control stays. So the new owner is bound by the leases that the previous owner sells them. But, for example, right, let's say you own a 6-unit building or an 8-unit building, and you decided, hey, you know what, I don't want it anymore. Someone can come in and say, hey, you know what, I want to tear down the building, I want to build a bigger building. That means that all the tenants have to vacate. It's very, very common that after a sale, tenants turn over and they have to leave for whatever reason.
So in a sense, those low-cost rents are going away as a result of this.
100%.
Whether the housing could get lost or the landlord might have to charge more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It already has a huge impact on the housing costs in LA.
And you mentioned that these landlords are mom and pops. Can you explain who are these people?
Yeah, usually these are people who either bought a property for side income or inherited a property from their family. Usually these are families just like everyone, blue-collar families, right? They just happen to own a piece of property, or maybe they have an ADU in the back, right? These are honestly the saddest stories when someone elderly who is relying on fixed income, right? And for extra income, they're leasing a room in their house or their ADU in the back. And then someone comes in, one of these professional tenants, and takes advantage of it. These are the biggest, the impact on these clients is huge because they don't have all the money in the world to pay a lawyer. They don't have money to fight a lawsuit. And usually this property is the only equity they have. They don't have a lot of savings. And the impact on these people is huge, right? They almost always have to sell the building as a result.
They have to sell the building because...
Yeah.
And they reach out to you and they tell you the cases, right?
Yeah, yeah. And look, it's a very, very tough situation. I had a prospect call me in COVID. A tenant did not pay the rent as a result of the moratorium for 3.5 years. And he accumulated over $100,000 in debts. And the property owner relies on that income. And it took him another 6 to 7 months after that to get rid of that tenant. And just a small duplex, right? My client was over 80 years old.
So you mentioned you don't think LA has a housing shortage.
No, I don't think there's a housing shortage.
Can you tell us why?
Yeah, I think that the underlying assumption in a housing shortage, right, states that there is demand that's not being met. I think California has always had high demand for housing, right? If houses in Orange County or LA were going for $200,000, $300,000, everyone would move here. So of course there's always going to be demand in Southern California. The weather is great, the economy is great, it's a great place to live. I think that there's definitely a lesser variety of home prices, right? If you can only afford a house for $250,000, you don't have a lot of options in Southern California. I think that's a problem, right? But to extend that there is a housing problem, there's a housing problem, right? I don't think there's a housing shortage.
So you think there is enough houses, but the costs are too high?
I think a lot of times when people say there's a housing shortage, what they really mean is there's a shortage of a $300,000 home in a $1 million neighborhood. They want to live in a $1 million neighborhood, but they don't want to pay $1 million to live there. And if that's how you define a housing shortage, I think that's a little bit disingenuous. And if you look at how these terms are being coined and how legislation is passed based on that, right? Just like I said before, that evictions cause homelessness, that there is a housing shortage. A 2016 study from McKinsey came out saying that we have a $3.5 million home shortage in California. And how did they arrive at that number? They calculated that California was ranked 49 out of 50 states in housing per capita. And they said, in order to get to a place where we can match New York or New Jersey, which is comparable to California, we need about 1 million homes. Okay, great. Now, they also said that in 10 years, California is going to have a lot more people in it. And therefore, we need $2.5 million homes more. And that's how they got to the 3.5 million home shortage. Well, what happened? When it came out, the study was widely cited in a lot of newspapers, a lot of other academic studies, and it was a small part of why a lot of laws passed to increase density, to change neighborhoods, for eviction protections. And what happened since? Right now we have the benefit of hindsight. California has stagnated with its population growth. You know, we built more homes since 2016. So now the ratio is actually better. So when we rely on recently published studies that can be replicated, that have dubious standards, right, to pass all these laws, what exactly are we doing? These laws have real material impacts. Look at ULA, we just discussed previously. ULA was pushed.
Which was called the mansion tax.
Yeah, the mansion tax, right, which was disingenuous to begin with because it applies to everything, not just mansions. It was promised that we're going to get $1.3 million in revenue. That wasn't true. They told us that it's going to have a minimal impact on housing production. That wasn't true.
It was 1.2 billion, right?
1.2 billion, yes, 1.2 billion in revenue, which we are over a year, and we haven't even met that, right? We're about 860 million in revenue. ULA is a perfect example. It was pushed by several nonprofits, and it was aided by fancy UCLA studies, who was written by 2 PhDs. And these are people who are not developers, they're not housing providers, they're academics. And what did they say in their study, fancy UCLA study, right before people voted on ULA? That while ULA is going to have some impact on housing production, the overall impact from the excess tax revenue and building new housing production and homeless prevention is going to be a net benefit. They didn't anticipate it to have a big impact. Even though, at the time, every developer, everyone in real estate, everybody screamed from the rooftop, this is going to be a disaster. And what happened? It was a complete disaster. And now the same author who authored that UCLA study now wrote a new study that says that we need to repeal portions of ULA. That's the problem. We have these academic studies with no relation to the real world, and city council members and people in Sacramento are voting on these laws that have real life impact.
Before we get to the rest of this interview, this is a time to look at some key headlines in California. In our Epoch Times newspaper this week, California State is passing a law to allow rideshare workers to unionize. Workers who work for Uber and Lyft now, they can unionize. Before they couldn't do that because they were not full-time employees, and now the requirement has been removed. Governor Newsom is saying he's gonna cut funding to universities who comply with Trump administration. Trump administration is asking universities to limit international students, freeze tuition increases for the next 3 years, and not have preference on gender and race when it comes to admissions and hiring. California State ends Kamala Harris's tenancy law punishing parents. There was a law that passed in 2011 that punishes parents if their kids are missing 10% of school, and the parents could face $2,000 fine or a year in jail and get a misdemeanor for it. The lawmaker mentioned that these policies have failed.
If you find these headlines interesting, there's a lot more in our newspaper. Not only California news, national news, international, and China. And all the stories, we put a lot of effort in making them balanced and include different views. Get a subscription today for $1 by clicking the link below and let us know what you think. Now let's go back to the rest of the interview.
Why has ULA failed in your opinion?
I think many reasons. It's not a progressive tax. It sets, the tax triggers on a certain amount. It's not progressive. The tax is completely arbitrary. It's 5 and 6%. You can see immediately what happened to transactions after it was passed. There was a nosedive. Almost no transaction happened above $5 and $10 million afterwards, especially at the $10 million range. And I think that if you're coming from a place, a lot of people who supported ULA said, we have a housing shortage. If you argue there's a housing shortage, how does taking away 20 to 30% of developer profits make sense for housing production? And then on the back end, 30 to 35% of ULA tax income is diverted into homeless prevention. What does that mean? It means that the county is going to pay rent for people who are struggling to pay it, but most of it is going to go towards eviction defense. So you've made enforcing property rights harder It was going to cost the county millions and millions of dollars. You took away profit incentives from developers who, if you believe there is a housing shortage, are going to solve the problem. So really, ULA is squeezing the problem from both sides, from the front end and the back end.
Do you think if there is discussion among academia with the industry, do you think that's going to change things?
I don't think so, honestly. The problem is political. If you need to get elected at a local level in any city in LA County, the easiest way to do so is to have a class of people that are completely dependent on you to keep their entitlements, right? Like rent control and tenant protections. So if you make it harder on people to own homes, and it is true that the path to home ownership is very, very difficult right now, right? And that's a real problem. If you're a young professional or a young family, if you're not making a lot of money, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, you have no path to home ownership in Southern California. Very, very difficult. So if you are going to be a renter forever, you're going to vote for people that promise you to expand and maintain your renter protections. We all know what happens when you start owning homes. Your voting pattern changes, right? You can look at the suburbs and you can look at the cities. And I think that's the problem, right? So you look at LA City Council, how are people elected? You look at the trends of the type of political positions that people vote on. It's to expand tenant rights, right? And if you have a voter class that's going to be a renter forever, that's who you're going to vote for. And that's the problem.
How do you think is a way for California to break out of these policies and kind of make them more balanced?
You know, for a while I thought this Supreme Court might reverse rent control and invalidate it, but if they haven't done it until now, that's probably not going to happen. To be honest, I don't know. I think we're on this populism wave right now, even locally, right? We have about a third of LA City Council now are DSA associated, the Democratic Socialists of America. And while they seem receptive to building more housing in LA, they're also very, very strong on tenant protections, right? I don't see any scenario in which evictions are going to be faster or the rules relaxed. So I don't know how it looks like. I think that on our end, the eviction attorneys and real estate lawyers, we probably need to do a better job at getting more creative and advising our clients how to better enforce their rights. And I think that's probably something my industry needs to work on better. I think a lot of the ways we've been practicing is the same way we've been practicing for 5 years. I think that we need to find more creative ways to give our clients more leverage in the process and more options on how to enforce their rights, because right now what we're doing is not working.
And what about the professional tenants? Do you have any recommendations for the LA City or LA County and the state to figure out how to deal with them?
If I could appear in front of city council, what I would do is I'd create some carve-outs. And look, I'm a strong believer that tenants deserve due process. They deserve tenant protections. I don't think someone should get evicted if they just miss one payment. I think it's good, especially in California, for tenants to have rights, right? I don't think that to have laws like in Arizona or Indiana or Florida are right for California. I don't think evictions should take 2 weeks. But I don't think if someone is committing illegal acts on the property or committing a nuisance or selling drugs on the property is entitled to rent control protections. I don't think they get to say, okay, I'm dismissing a case based on a technicality. We can have carve-outs to deal with that type of problems, right? So repeat offenders, we can take care of that. And I think the second advice I'll give housing providers. I think housing providers have been vetting tenants in a way that's fit for maybe 10 years ago, right? So if you have a house for rent or an apartment for rent, you're probably looking at income, credit, maybe some references. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think housing providers need to look at litigation history. I think that they need to look at, do a better job in independently verifying tenant applications. In all the worst cases that I've had, about 95% of them could have been prevented if there was a thorough vetting process of the tenant. And I think that requires education, which is something I'm trying to do with my clients as well.
For the lawmakers and city council members and a lot of their staff members and themselves watch the show. What would you recommend to them to fix these laws? How can they fix it?
I think that if you talk to someone in city council or their staff members off the record, I think they'll acknowledge that the system right now is broken. It's not working. I also don't think there's going to be any appetite, right, to increase the rights of landlords, right? That's political suicide for them. But I do think it's going to require some big picture thinking and long-term thinking, right? If you believe there is a housing shortage and you believe that more houses are going to lower prices and you want to make a better future for everyone, then it's going to require better balance, right? We have to provide landlords an ability to quickly enforce their rights. And if we want a long process, and that's the goal, right, then we have to be less restrictive with the rules.
In terms of the tenants that are actually following the law and paying rent on time, and do you have any thoughts for them?
I think that the best way to protect your tenant rights and to make sure that you're not caught up in this system, because the system will chew you up, and it's a very, very, even the professional tenants who go through the process, it's very, very unpleasant. There's no way anyone enjoys going through a process like that. I think that good communication with your landlord and honesty can go a long way, right? Landlords don't want to go through this legal process for the most part, right? There's no advantage of evicting a good paying tenant because the landlord's going to lose money. So if you're running behind on rent 1 month and you know that's going to happen, just give a call. It's like, hey, just to let you know, I need until the 10th to pay the rent. Most of the time, that's going to be completely okay.
So you've been practicing law for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And you have seen the real estate law, and you guys care about the law.
Yeah.
How does it feel to be in your shoes seeing things are broken now as these laws are passing?
It's very frustrating. And I see judges that are frustrated with the process. Right? Being an eviction judge is very, very hard, right? I am not jealous of their position at all. The system doesn't like these cases, right? Nobody likes to try these cases. I think jurors, I can imagine a juror coming into a jury. We make 30 people show up to jury duty about an eviction for a tenant who didn't pay $3,000 in rent. And it's absurd, right? I don't think anyone's to take away time from their family, from their job, from their career, from their school to do that. It's an unfortunate system, right? I think it's a system that doesn't make any sense. And I hope that we have leaders that can make tough decisions that might seem unpopular to start, but on the long term can have good impacts for everyone.
Avi Sinai, Los Angeles real estate attorney, it was great to have you on California
Thank you
Insider.
for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Let us know what you think about the LA eviction laws and process. You can always email us at siamak@californiainsider.com or comment. We read all of your emails and comments. And make sure to consider everyone when you write those comments because we want everybody to come to our platform to learn. I'm Siamak Khorrami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.